You always need to be feeding your mind. You decide to feed it intentionally. We call it stop, slow, go. Whether you're doing all of those things or not, your brain is trying to find ways to make sure.
Today, I am inviting on the show Lissy Alden, founder of MYNDY, a revolutionary mental fitness company. Lissy shares her journey from burnout in high-stress corporate roles multiple times to helping leaders build focus, energy, and resilience. So if you're ready to rethink how you lead under pressure, well, this episode is definitely your wake-up call.
Everyone I had known was like stressed by work.
No matter what is happening, high level of stress, we tend to disregard it because we are so much focused on something that is meaningful that we love it.
Too much chocolate cake is too much chocolate cake, even if you like it.
People, they are such an incredible level of stress. How can we make their life easier?
We always say you have to stop, slow, and go to manage the rhythm of your life.
What does it mean to be CEO?
Being a CEO and founder today is...
What if the secret of extraordinary leadership and peak performance isn't working harder, but training your mind like an athlete? Well, today I'm inviting on the show Lissy Alden, founder of MYNDY, a revolutionary mental fitness company. So, Lissy shares her journey from burnout in high-stress corporate roles multiple times to helping leaders build focus, energy, and resilience. So if you're ready to rethink how you lead under pressure, well, this episode is definitely your wake-up call. So, let's dive in. Hi everyone, and welcome back to a new episode of the World Class Leaders Show. And today I'm so excited to have with me Lissy Alden. Lissy is the founder of MYNDY, a mental fitness company that provides workouts for the modern mind. So before building MYNDY, Lissy specialized in working with organizations to measure and operationalize culture, improve engagement, and enhance workforce development. And she partnered with some of the world's largest corporations, from JP Morgan to Amex and New York Times, and other startups. She has an MBA from MIT, but you're a graduated Cornell, but we'll have time to discuss more about her career. But let me start with this. So, by the way, Lissy, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
So, Lissy, I really would like to start with a question that might look easier, but it's not that easy. Is what does it mean, given that you are a founder, a CEO, but you come also from a corporate environment? We'll get into that later. What does it mean to be in 2024, almost 2025, being a CEO?
Whoa, hitting me with the hard questions, like starting out here. It means a lot of things. I think I'll talk about three, but there's a lot. I mean, the first is that it's an all-in mentality. Like CEOs, no matter how busy they were able to shut off because they were able to shut off their phones, their computers, their email. And now being a CEO means in many ways, like you are expected to not necessarily have boundaries between who you are personally and what you do at work because of the amount of time and where you spend that time. I'd say the second thing is that I always say that being a CEO and founder is kind of like being a combination of if you have a ship, you're like the captain and also the custodian of the ship. So you're constantly trying to make sure you're navigating where you're going while also cleaning up a lot of messes that nobody else wants to touch. And it's important because I think a lot of people think that the role of a CEO and or founder is quite glamorous. And you spend a lot of time like in the metaphorical toilet, like dealing with tax and legal and all sorts of things that may or may not be within your area of expertise or comfort. But your job is to just get really good at all of that while making sure the ship, stays a course. And I think the last thing is being a CEO and founder today is, it sounds a little cliche, but like it's lonely. I think when I used to think about the research I was doing when I was at MIT, they used to say that organizations used to be like these pyramids that were very static. You were the leader, the information was flowing down and up at a pretty regular cadence. But now organizations are what they call complex adaptive systems. So they're changing all the time. And what's hard about, again, we use the ship analogy, leading the ship, is that you're the only person who has the view that you do of all of the things that are going on. And so it can be hard to make sure that you've got the right kind of support, guidance, advice, which at times can leave you in a little bit of a chamber of being all on your own to make these big decisions.
Yeah, and that's interesting because some of the things that you shared are probably more specific to, the founder's lifestyle, especially trying to be on top of everything, like, for a medium, large organization. Hopefully, there are more other people to do most of the things that, a founder does. But the last part that you said, feeling lonely and isolated and solo, I think that's really consistent, regardless really how large is the organization. So I think that's, to me, is tick the boxes of all the one of the major challenges of being a CEO. So that resonates a lot with me and the experience that I have, working with CEOs. All right, so I'm so curious and interesting about your story, Lissy, because I think it deserves to be said. I mean, you have had a successful career in corporate roles before founding Mindy. If I'm not mistaken, it was 2020 during pandemic. Is that right?
Right before the pandemic. I actually started
Right
in
before.
2019.
Yeah, 19. Sorry. Okay. So really, what led you to shift your focus from traditional corporate work to mental fitness, not only to become an entrepreneur, because that, I think, is an ambition, aspiration of many, but specific to mental fitness. And how did that journey really inspire the creation of Mindy?
Yeah. So I grew up all over the world, lived in Japan, Taiwan, Thailand, all over the United States, and was always kind of fascinated by different cultures and people, and went to college to actually be a doctor. Ended up taking a sociology class to get my arts and sciences credits out of the way and fell in love with that as a topic and ended up majoring in that. Um, but realized that, like, I wanted to really make sure that if I started a nonprofit, which was my original plan, I wanted to run it like a for-profit business. So I went and worked at JP Morgan right after school thinking this will give me the hard skills that I need to make sure that I can run this nonprofit and really change the world and measure impact. And that's not what I learned at all. It was an incredibly stressful job. I was working all the time. I was constantly, on a personal level, I was constantly being told to be a bit different. Like my feedback was very personal. Stop putting, so many exclamation points. Why are you so excited about work? I mean, really, like I started to love my job and then I started to not love it when people told me to stop. But like my enthusiasm wasn't appreciated in the workplace. And the amount of the hard work that I was doing was, I had a colleague pull me aside and said it made them look bad. Like there was this, very like interesting dynamic that I had never ever faced. And so I thought, okay, let me go ahead and switch workplaces and see how that goes. So I ended up looking for other jobs and I found a job at General Assembly, which is an ed tech company. The company went from 40 to 1,000 people in 3 years. Now, when I joined at 40 people, I thought this is perfect. Like I get to be at a small organization. I got to kind of get to build something from scratch.
Right.
I get to work with executives every day. So it was a culture I was very, excited to continue to engage with. But I burned out when I was there because I was traveling all over the world. And I mean, we were in Dubai, Hong Kong, all over Europe. And I was running a big team of people. And I literally did not have time to take care of myself. And I felt like my job was the most important thing. And I had to give everything to that. And so I ended up leaving there to go to MIT because I thought that the reason I was so stressed and so tired was work. I thought if all of my clients while I was at General Assembly were stressed and I was stressed while there, I was stressed at JP Morgan, all my friends, family members, everyone I had known was like stressed by work. That must be the problem. So I went to MIT to build a quantitative research backed model to fix companies. I was like, everyone's talking about great company culture, but who's actually holding the hand of executives to help them shift it? And so I built a model based on system dynamics, which is, an engineering principle to kind of build the right systems where employees could be not only happy, but more importantly, productive because that makes them happy. I found out very quickly. And then you could build a big, beautiful company that was growing fast and wouldn't burn out your employees. So burnout for me started at the company level. I was like, work is causing this.
Yeah. So let me expand a little bit about that, because to me, kind of you simplify something that is it's not of course you did not simplify, but we went so quickly to go through this experience, but to me deserve to expand a little bit. What does it mean living the experience in burnout that that you just described? Because, by the way, I think it's so common, so it's one of the major challenges that many people have right now, and that is not something, at least my personal experience, given by specific circumstances like extraordinary events like what happened during COVID, but it's a consistent element of living today work, living and experiencing work, given how organizations work. And if I remember correctly, I mean, it is in between the lines. I mean, you really experienced burnout multiple times.
That's
So
correct.
which is fascinating to from a hand, and the other end, I feel so much compassionate about your experience because that's
Yeah.
not really a pleasant, experience to have. How did you recognize that you were actually going, maybe for the second time, maybe it was easier because you had it before, I suppose. But for the first time, how did you recognize when you really moved, into that zone? Because sometimes my experience, people they don't recognize until it's too late. So anything to share?
Yeah, I mean, so many things. So thanks for actually stopping me there because I think the creepiest part about burnout, because it's a creepy thing, is that it creeps up on you, is that most people, including myself, didn't know I was burned out until I was burned out. And physiologically speaking, and one of my favorite facts is that your brain takes up between, around 2% of your body weight, between 20 and 30% of the energy that you burn every day. So that when you're tired and exhausted, it's harder to think well. We tend to make shortcuts in the way that we think. So what I notice about myself is those shortcuts tended to be negative. When someone asked me about my day, all of a sudden, instead of saying, oh, I was at work and I had a great sandwich and I got to see my friend, I would only talk about the bad stuff. Like I'd be like, you can't, I couldn't wait to talk about like, this is like the three things that went really wrong today at work. And I'm a very positive person by nature. And so the hint for me was like, whoa, I noticed that like I was never talking about the good things. So that was the first. I mean, the second for me is that I started to question myself a lot at work. So like everything was really like I would do something and then find myself thinking like, did I say the right thing in the meeting? And that thought would loop for me at night. Like that rumination cycle, call it the doom loop, was like very real. And then I was just so tired. It was like hard for me to do the things that I always did that always made me feel good. So when I started to drop like eating well and I was eating a lot more carbs, or I started to not go to the gym. I love the gym, but like I would say, oh, I'm too tired to go at the end of the day. um, I would like let go of these habits. That's when I could tell things were starting to slip. But the negativity was honestly like the biggest signal for me. And now that I understand the brain like I do, it makes sense why.
Yeah. So if to paraphrase what you said is the impact on your mental health, your mental stability, your focus, your energy, etc., was higher than anything else. But you recognize when you were in that zone, even from the language, from how you were speaking. So that's interesting because I think it's consistent with what I see. Is the second time. So the second time that you had a burnout, have you been able to spot it earlier because you started to see the same patterns, or was completely different experience?
Completely different experience. And I love that you
Mm,
asked that. So, second time it was physical. So
okay.
it was my stomach was hurting all the time. I
Right.
was losing
Right.
weight, which, I hate to say it, it's like one thing if you're gaining weight, people think there's something wrong. If you're losing weight as a woman in New York City, it was like, oh, you look great. And I, meanwhile, was like, I don't feel great. So my stomach was hurting. I was going to the doctor. I got tested at the time. Stress wasn't a part of the, test. So they were testing me for celiac disease and parasites because I had been in Southeast Asia for a while and all sorts of things. And then I wasn't sleeping. And that to me became like a trigger. I was like, something is very wrong with me because I would wake up in the middle of the night thinking about the travel that I had the next morning. And I was like, this is gone. Like the work thing, at the time we weren't using the term burnout. I was like, my stress is out of control. And that was what I realized. I was like, I think that my stomach and all these physical issues that I was facing were really stress related. And it was the not sleeping. I sat down with my mom and she's like, you're not doing well. And I was like, I know. What do I do? And that's when she was like, how's everything going at work? Like really, not like it's great. Traveling's great. The company's growing. Like, how are you? And I said, not so good.
Listen, one of the things that we used to say, at least in the leadership community, is that when you have such a strong purpose for what you're doing, and is either personal or related to your company, your employer, no matter what is happening, that so level of high level of stress or hard work, we tend to disregard it because we are so much focused on something that is meaningful that we love it. Now, I don't want to go into the specific, working experience, but did you notice any relationship between how you felt and how the organization was supporting you, inspiring you? or you think is totally unrelated? So no matter what the organization is doing, the culture there, if we feel that way, we're gonna feel that way.
Good question. I think, I'd burned out a couple times and, when I talked about the physical one, which is in many ways like the
Mm,
most detrimental and the last straw until I pivoted my career to kind of
right.
work on these things. I was in love with my job. I mean, I loved what I did. I was all in, baby. It wasn't my company, but it felt like mine. And being able to have an identity outside of work doesn't mean, oh, I can go do activities outside of work. It means I am able to actively shift my mindset and my values from what's happening with me at work and how I'm behaving at work to how I behave outside of work. And ideally, there's consistency there. But I was not able to separate myself. I loved that I checked my phone every night. I'm like, I love my job. Of course, this is the way it's got to go. But like anything, like my mom used to say, too much chocolate cake is too much chocolate cake. Even if you like it, it can be a challenge. And so I've also been in a situation where I didn't love my job, right, and still burned out. But it did feel a little different. And yeah, I think everyone needs to be aware that it's something that can happen.
Yeah, that's interesting, very interesting, because I think so, yes, again, I think one thing that I love about this podcast is by speaking and talking and sharing experiences, potentially we started to see different point of views, a different perspective about the world, everything, right? So, and I think you're giving a different perspective about living and feeling burnout that goes beyond, whatever is a good passion and purpose for for the job. I think that's great because again, there are probably people, in the audience right now, they're maybe feeling that way, and they say, "Yeah, I still love my job, but nobody's listening to me, and nobody it's really supportive because they think that maybe I'm disengaged." I think you were very much engaged based on what you just shared. By the way, it was easy to talk, with people in organization. Now, look, the mental health, broadly speaking, is a topic. Not always, not everywhere, but I would say, if you
Totally.
talk about mental health, people more than before, they're gonna listen to you, or at least they were gonna try to help you. That's
Totally.
has been your experience before starting your company, or is very different than what it is right now?
Good question. Very different. I mean, yeah, back then you did not talk about mental health. You didn't talk about going to therapist. I mean, I was even in New York City. I would talk about those things with my friends, but very openly, but never at work.
Right. It was a stigma, kind of a stigma, imagine.
Super. Yeah, it was almost like, if you brought that up, it was not just like a weakness, it was almost like an
Yeah.
excuse you
Yes.
had to bring up?
Yeah, for performance or for declining, whatever, Right. So let's talk a bit about, Mindy, because, you were saying you went to MIT, so you did your research, etc. And then came the idea, of creating Mindy in 2019, as you said, to focus on mental fitness, that's the way how you call it. So build focus, flow, and energy. So how does first of all, why don't you explain your view about mental fitness? What does it mean, and why is different than mental health you were just talking about? And what does it mean really for people at work?
Yeah. So when we talk about mental health now as a category, I think what's amazing is the conversation's happening. But the hard part is we're all talking about something that not necessarily, when I ask people what they mean by mental health, everyone says something a little different.
Mm.
And so what we've done at MYNDY is we're writing a white paper about that overall mental health space to kind of break it down so that people understand what we're talking about when we talk about solutions. So there's, the illness wellness continuum created by this guy named John Tavis. And he talks about product services or applications that help you deal with a mild mental strain, so a clinical or subclinical issue like episodic anxiety or depression, to something more severe like bipolar. But then you've also got on the other side of this, the wellness side of the continuum, which are the behaviors that you can do that help build wellness in your mind or that fight what I call wellness challenges, like stress, exhaustion, and burnout, which, if
Right.
left unaddressed, become episodic depression and anxiety.
Yeah.
So mental health is more of a spectrum than like a thing.
Yeah.
We talk about mental fitness as the proactive practice of exercises that help you beat stress and build focus, energy, and high performance in your mind. And these exercises are, they can be a lot of things. So right now, when we talk about things like mental fitness, we're talking about exercises you do from therapy, like cognitive behavioral therapy exercises. Any of the longevity studies, right? Even cold plunging that helps you with, a certain mental state and build resilience. You could be talking about anything, right? Supplements or hygiene. So it's really about the behaviors that you do that help you build wellness in your mind. What's interesting though, and what we really wanted to do at Mindy is that I had friends before I started this company who were gratitude journaling every night, exercising every day, managing their sleep, eating well, and still stressed. And they were like, why? And so I started studying the brain and found that, no surprise, the brain is one of the most, if not the most complex thing ever found on the planet. We still only know a fraction of probably what we need to know to truly unlock the magic that it is. But there are over 8 disciplines that study the mind on a regular basis, from neuroscience to performance psychology and beyond, and that there are certain things our brain needs every day to feel good and healthy. And so I built this framework after 8 months of research, brought on my professor from MIT to help oversee what I was doing, and started teaching it. And the framework has 2 parts. We've got mental movements, which are daily movements your brain needs every day that actually refresh your mind so that you don't burn out. And then there's mental muscles that you activate for any sort of goal setting or high performance activity that you're trying to do.
Right.
And so that's like when we think about mental fitness, we think about these routines you do, again, to build strength, flexibility, and endurance in your mind. And they're really about these behaviors you do over and over again, as opposed to these kind of quick hit moments.
So this exercise, do they have a specific structural change in the brain? Because that's something that neuroscientists, of course, study. There is something like that is a kind of an outcome of doing that on a consistent basis.
Yeah, absolutely. So it might be helpful. I'll go into the daily mind movement. So I always like to say, if this is the only part of the podcast that you really pay attention to, this is it. Your brain basically needs 3 things every single day to feel good. And it's what we call stop, slow, and go. So stop is essentially recovery. And I know you speak a lot about this in your work, but this is really about the practice of resting and building awareness in your mind. Most of us operate like an athlete who's on the field or on the treadmill 24/7. We are constantly feeding our brains with more information, but really you have to actually rest your mind. So if you just think about what you can do to exercise this mental muscle or movement, it's really about mindfulness, meditation, breath work, or just not bringing your phone to the toilet, right? It's about finding quiet time for your mind. And we find that when we do this, your brain has more time to encode the information you learn. And it improves your memory when you do less. It allows you to actually learn better, and it allows you to sustain endurance for longer at the end of the day. So, meaning when you rest your mind, you are able to work for longer periods of time over time because your brain doesn't feel the need to find energy that's not there anymore.
Yeah.
So that's just one example of a mental movement. Slow is the practice of expanding your perspective. This is about cross training your mind. So this is creativity. This is about learning about new industries, cognitive behavioral therapy, anything that helps you expand the current mental patterns that you currently default to every day.
Yeah.
So, yeah, go ahead.
No, I look, to me, it's just music for my ear. I mean, to me, it's I can't, it's study. Although sometimes we don't want to recognize that you can't really achieve any sort of peak performance without having enough time to rest, because every peak requires a valley. So that's his, science based approach on performance. So to me, it makes totally sense. Now, what would be really a good question for you, and
Yeah.
I know because we discussed earlier about that, is the biggest objection that we can really get from people. They are busy, meaning, they have high level of pressure, they need to make decisions, as most of the people in our audience, do. They don't have the time for anything, and they feel like they need to be always on, because if they're not on, they're losing something, control, you name it. How can we help people that are so busy, primarily executives, or I'm thinking as well other disciplines. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but the other discipline comes to mind is, a surgeon, or people, they are such an incredible level of stress due to the kind of activity, or the workers, they work in the front line. how can we make their life easier? And I'm sure that Mindy, when the purpose is, trying to expand this and make it something meaningful for many, many, many people, how can we help really people to see that as a need, and not just going back to their old practice and habits?
Yeah. So I think the big thing is at the end of the day, we always say you have to stop, slow, and go to manage the rhythm of your life.
Mm,
If you are a high performer, which all of these folks are, from frontline, workers within healthcare to a trader or any sort of CEO, it's absolutely essential that you treat your mind the same way a professional athlete treats their body, which is with respect and an
yeah.
understanding for what it needs. And so I always like to say, for somebody who doesn't have time in the day, when they hear someone like me talk, they typically think that must be nice. When I quit my job one day, I can't wait to rest my
Yeah,
brain.
exactly. Exactly.
But what you can do is what I like to say is actually you double up on something you're already doing with one of these exercises. So I already gave the example of not bringing your phone to the toilet, right? Like that's a silly thing. Most people laugh, but like a lot of people do that. On their breaks, they're trying to catch up with text messages and friends. The
Yes.
problem is their brain hasn't finished processing the meeting they were just in, the surgery they just did. And so they're putting in even more and they're suffocating their mind essentially. And so finding that time in the car to spend 10 minutes, literally 10 minutes, no radio, no podcast, no phone call, just like let your brain marinate. So using a little bit of the time you have better is really, really a great way to start with this. And then I'd say anytime you are feeling like anything that you hear within this space is getting a little too much, like, oh, it must be nice to breathe. Again, that's like, I don't have 30 minutes. It's like any goal, like chopping it down to the smallest possible increments so that, as one of our clients once said, so small you trip over it is really important. So in this case, if you're struggling to, again, take a moment to take a breath or take a moment to actually expand your perspective or learn something new, you read one article. And if you can't read an article, you could find, a friend and ask them to tell you something, a fun fact. But I always like to say, you got to make the goal so small, it almost feels silly.
Yeah, that makes totally sense. And to me, it also what is the science of psychology of behaviors, how they can actually get activated. And to me is, I mean, you're totally right. Small habits, but consistently. But two elements to me I would probably consider in based on what you're just saying. One is James Clear in his book Atomic Habits, and most of people have read it. As a best-selling book. He says something very profound. He says that you can't really change any any habit unless it becomes part of your identity or is connected to your own identity, because otherwise it becomes just driven by you know, goals. Like, I want to lose 10 kilos. Okay, I'm gonna go to the gym for 3 months. I'm gonna lose 10 kilos, and then I'm good. And then you're going back to the same routine because if it happened once, it will probably happen again. But if it becomes part of your identity because you want to be a very healthy person and you want to change the narrative, how you talk to yourself, they will become, a sustainable new habit, in the long run. So that's one area that I think is important to consider, because otherwise, whatever you do, you will have a short term, advantage if it doesn't become part of who you want to be. In other words, does it make sense to you?
Absolutely. And that's why I say if you're a high performer, you have to treat your mind the same way an athlete or a high performing athlete treats their body. It's part of your job. Yes, if that's how you identify.
Yes, perfect. And the other point, which leads me to the next question, is actually about the mindset. Because the reality is people don't really change their actions. And again, that is being proven by neuroscience. People don't really change their action until they change their way of thinking. Until they change, they see something different for themselves. Otherwise, they will keep doing the same thing all over the time because that's what they see in front of them. Now, how can we really help? Exactly, not just tactically giving, ideas or habits to become much more mental fit. How can we help people, to change their mindset, to see things differently? And I go, the extreme is until you really burn out or something, hopefully not, but something bad happens, you know, it's like a burning platform. If there is a burning platform, it's easier for people to change their way of thinking or see the world and making new habits, right? But most of people, and your experience, I think, is similar. They don't really need to get to, you know, an end state when they're really bad, they're feeling so bad, right? How can we help people to change their mindset about, their mental fitness earlier on? And I think that is like also a question in terms of corporates, generally speaking, their culture. So do you have any view about how we can help leaders to change their mindset first?
Yeah, of course. So we have a behavioral model that sits behind what we do. It's a little cheesy, so forgive me. There's basically three things that you can do that really help you to see some results in your mindset. So
Okay.
the first is find some inspiration. Maybe it's a person who you really admire, whose mindset you respect, could be famous or not. I also love leaning on the best version of yourself. Like when you were at your best, what were you like? What were you doing? And what were you thinking? The next thing, and by the way, inspiration can also be the form of quotes. It can be the form of a movie, you name
Yeah, in
it. Like
many
I
shape
always go
or
back
form.
to,
Yeah.
I go
Yeah.
back to Rudy, but inspiration's the first one. I always like to say that that fades a little bit. The next one is what we call perspiration. It's really about like doing the work. And yes, like neuroscience says it's really hard to change our behavior without a spark, but behavior um, can actually be the catalyst for a shift in thought. So, for example, I didn't feel like going to the gym this morning, but I told myself that if I just went downstairs, I could get a really special coffee this morning. I went downstairs. When I was down there, that was like all the momentum I needed to keep going. And so, again, whether you like it or not, I do really feel like these small behaviors matter and doing them with other people matter the most. So, whatever it is you're trying to do, if you can find somebody who's at your level in some capacity, if you're a CEO, go find another buddy who's a CEO to do something small. It's really, really meaningful. And then the last thing is something I just engaged in, which is support. So there's a famous behavioral psychologist named BJ Fogg out of Stanford. He wrote Tiny Habits, another one of these guys. And he basically says we change best when we feel good, not when we feel bad. Meaning it's really hard when you're in a tough spot to actually work to feel better. So the best way to do that is to find little moments in your life. They might not be related to the thing you're struggling with your mindset on that help you feel good and try to bring that into whatever you're doing. So, the scientific speak here is like temptation bundling. So bring something you love into something that's hard. So I listen to The Killers when I'm doing legal contracts, fun fact. And that's how I change my mindset when I don't want to do something, right? For other times, like I said, I was able to say, okay, I'm going to bring this coffee into the morning workout that I didn't want to do. But it's finding something that helps you celebrate whatever you're doing, not to be toxically positive, but actually to help build motivation or desire until the actual behavior then creates the next,
Yeah, I love it.
bit of like momentum.
Yeah, I love it. 100% agreed. Now, you share a few example of these practices. Now, based on your studies and your experience, it may be something that you already shared, but there's one single practice that could be more effective than others. I know it's a probably is a stupid question, but if people
No,
want
not
to
at all.
say, give me one or two. I mean, you said once, for example, don't bring, the your mobile, on the toilet to the toilet, or as you just said. But there is something that probably could make us the biggest difference, and maybe it's also easier to implement.
Yeah. So I do two things every single day I'd love to share because they're so small and fast. I always like to say anyone can do them. So the first thing is every evening I share my three wins for the day. So three things that I went well. And then my three planned wins for the next day with my twin sister over WhatsApp.
Oh, there you go.
Um,
Interesting.
so she lives in Israel. And so she wakes up to that, and I get to wake up to hers every morning. And it's a very special way to connect with
Oh,
her when we normally
wow.
don't, exist in the same time zone. So that's special. So finding someone to share wins with, it's a little cringe at first, even for us two. And now we look forward to it. When we don't get it, it's usually there's something going on. So that's a good note to check in.
Nice.
The second thing I do every morning, I actually do it with MYNDY, is I set up my three priorities for the day and I start the single most important thing that I need to do every morning, which sounds really simple, almost so simple it's silly. But what it helps me do is make sure I know how I'm going to win my day. Because most of the folks who are listening are high-powered executives. They have more things on their to-do list than they can do in any day. And being really clear on what thing I do that I can then put down my laptop at the end of the day and feel good about is essential. We always say you have to know how to win your day. And so I set up my game every day with my 3 priorities and starring my first thing.
Love it. I really love it. And I can tell you is what you just shared, even the first example, and I have something to say on that. But especially what you just shared now, I think it's a fantastic insight for a lot of people. They are incredibly busy and they don't even have time to prepare one single meeting right now. So they are jump from one meeting to another without even clear what they really want to achieve. I think that is a fantastic, by the way, leadership exercise as well. It's not just for for your mind. It's really helping you to be clear or you really want to achieve for the day and what people you need to have a conversation with or what you want to change in people mindset so they can see something different. So that is a part of lead. So to me, that's really leadership. So I think that's a fantastic, correlation to the work that we're doing. Back to your example about your twin season, which is amazing. I think reinforces the idea of we need a support system in place, no matter what, because we can't be on our own regardless. I think that is a fantastic input. And for people, um, that have similar experience that yours by the living or the CEO life, where it's difficult to feel connected because from one hand, you can't really be friends with your colleagues. On the other hand, you can't really share whatever is in your mind because otherwise, you might be perceived as weak or whatever. You know, I'm gonna challenge that because that's actually is a sign of vulnerability and be authentic. But regardless, that's how people perceive being very open. So I think it's important a support system. I mean, with me, we are creating a CO peer group, and next year, just that's one of the main reasons to feel connected with people you can really feel safe and be transparent, open to talk to. Because otherwise, it's not going to happen. At least not by default. You have to create that condition. So I think it resonates a lot with me. Anything else to share? Because I have a question, which is more a kind of a final question. But by the way, that's super insightful conversation. So I will probably stay for hours. But look, there are many other. So there are people here in the audience that say, "Okay, great. So I understand the power of that. We discussed about the early signs or what potentially go wrong. You gave me some ideas. How can I create some sort of fitness, for my brain, and you gave me as well some specific uh, potential practices or exercises. But what is some final advice you would like to share with people right now in the audience? And they're concerned for their own health right now, and by they don't want to share it, or they're not really have the opportunity to share. Or other people they don't see this is coming. They say, no, 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 it will never happen to me. No, 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 they will never happen to me. And then I'll tell you an interesting story about a guest that came on a podcast, by the
Yeah.
way. So what is your
Um,
any other advice if you have, Lizzie? Don't Yeah.
yeah, I'd say in the same way a car, if you don't feed it gas, will run out of gas and stop. You always need to be feeding your mind. And whether, you decide to feed it intentionally with the kinds of things that are going to help it grow and learn and continue to develop over time, like, resting your mind and making sure you're expanding your perspective by learning and you're recognizing progress and you're making progress every day. Like we call it stop, slow, go. Whether you're doing all of those things or not, like your brain is trying to find ways to make sure that it's doing okay. And so this, I always like to say the single most important thing you can do is spend a moment in silence, again, in the car. It could be, right before you start your first meeting, even if you're 1 minute late, saying like, how am I feeling like up here? How are my thoughts? How's my decision making? How am I essentially processing information? And if the answer is anything other than great, let's rock, then you probably need a little something. And it doesn't have to be formal or fancy, and it doesn't have to be long, but you need about a minute to make sure your brain has something good for it. And so I always like to say, like, the people who say they don't have a minute are typically the ones, and this is quite a famous quote actually, the ones who need it the most. So yeah, everyone needs to take care of their mind.
Yeah, I love it. And I think is shifting from becoming healed to become a better performance and performer, I think that is an important mental shift to understand the power of what you were just saying, because otherwise will be much more, people will be probably related too much on I'm healthy, I feel okay, I don't need all of that, to I feel healthy, I'm okay, but if I can really work on that, my ability to perform at my best, it will actually increase. So we'll have it will a domino positive effect on my results, performance, success, whatever success means for people, right?
Absolutely.
Amazing. So, Lissy, that was exciting conversation. Just love it. So, where people should really go if they want to understand a little bit more about you, your work, and what you offer into organizations?
Yeah, so, you can find me personally on LinkedIn. I absolutely love LinkedIn. It's my favorite and only social media. And then as a company, you can find us at www.mindy.co. We also have an app on the App Store now that's currently being tested, but we would love to have you join our wait list and pull you into the application as soon as you're interested. And yeah, we're on TikTok and Instagram as well.
Great. And how will the app will work? So, people will subscribe and they will have access to a number of habits, exercises, advice. That's how it's going to
Yeah,
work.
so today we've got it's iOS only today,
Okay.
just because we're currently testing. Want to make sure we get it right. But you log in. We've got a 10-minute mental fitness routine, and you can do one part of it that lasts a minute, or you can do all 10. And every day it's a little different, and we track your progress. You can invite your own mental fitness team if you please, and cheer each other on. But yeah, it's 10 minutes a day to work on your mind so that you can be your best every day.
That's it. That's what is needed. Lissy, thank you so much for being in the show. It's been an amazing experience.
Thank you for having me.